And I'm so excited to be with Geri today. Every time we talk, we have fun conversations. She has so much expertise to share with us. And so, Geri, I'm going to let you introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to know. And then when you're ready for the presentation, the slides, you let me know.
Thank you so much, Denise. So this part, yes, I'm Dr. Geri Miller. You're welcome to call me Geri. As I'm seeing names pop up, hello to people who I know. And I am really glad to be with you. This is the first time I've been with, so I'm reading it, the Watauga Compassionate Community Initiative, WCCI. And I'm really impressed with the little bit I've learned about the work that you're doing. I'm really impressed. I was telling Denise with what a medley of people you are in terms of roles and experience. And so I wanted to start by saying I really think of it as an honor that I'm here with you and appreciate that very much. And my whole goal is to be helpful to you in the work that you're doing, because as I understand it, some of you are students, professors, service providers, pastors, parents, and there may be others too. And that's why I am very impressed also with your taking time out of what has to be your busy lives to be here, especially during the pandemic. And then I need to acknowledge my group, my people here at the university, released me from a very critical meeting for 1 hour to be with you. So the community counseling program of the HPC department, I just wanted to acknowledge them too. Okay, so me, what I'm gonna do is tell you just a little bit about me, and then I'm gonna go to the slides. Enough to maybe give you a background of who I am, although I know some people know that. So here we go. So I'm ready for the slides where they can see the acronyms.
There you go.
Oh, great. And what Denise and I are gonna do, we worked it out, is she's gonna coordinate the questions at the end, and we're gonna work together with me saying to her, next slide as we go along. So the first one, yes, I have a doctorate. My doctorate's in counseling psychology. I'm a diplomate in counseling psychology, which is not listed there as an acronym, but it's ABPP. It's the highest credential one can receive as a licensed psychologist in the United States, the ABAP credential. I'm also a licensed psychologist, a licensed clinical mental health counselor, a licensed clinical addiction specialist, and a certified clinical supervisor in the addictions area. And then the other things I don't list is I have a master addiction counselor credential. And I mentioned, I touched on that I've been in the counseling profession. I've worked in it since 1976 and in the substance use disorder field since 1979. For many years, 25 years in fact, I was a volunteer a psychologist at the Watauga County Health Department until December of 2020. And also worked with the American Red Cross Disaster Mental Health Services and was there at 9/11 twice. And so this last 20-year acknowledgement of that international crisis that happened on national soil of America was a very powerful experience for me, which was, P.S., my first disaster mental health work. So I was catapulted into it as I went to New York twice. And that's why I chuckle. So what I wanted you to hear is, as I'm talking about crisis intervention strategies throughout my time of working with people since 1976, you are receiving a compilation of strategies that I believe are like across the board. You will see referenced here at the bottom, Miller 2021. I am not trying to sell my book. However, I need to mention it because Wiley Press, who puts out the book, said I could use their diagram and any of this information to be helpful to my community. It came out in January, the 5th edition of this book, Learning the Language of Addiction Counseling. So that's my grandfather clock you're hearing. It takes a little while because it does it 12 times. So anyways, this book, the 5th edition, Wiley was generous enough to donate it to the Watauga County Public Library. And they also donated some of my other books too, that I've written with them, incorporating spirituality and counseling and psychotherapy, fundamentals of crisis counseling, group exercises for addiction counseling. So I'm not trying to sell any of my books. First off, all books tend to be expensive, but the other is that I just really wanted you to know that Wiley Press, in response to the 4 murders that happened, or 4 deaths in our community, felt so moved by it that when I contacted them, they said, we're donating books to your public library. So those are there if you want them. And I think that's really all about me. So, okay, here we go. We're into the slides now of crisis intervention strategies. And what I'm going to do is go through these at a pace. So to try to stay on time and make sure you have 15 minutes at the end. But you can see in the first one, what I'm simply trying to say is that, and I'm guessing you all know this, but to say it out loud, is that what we need to do is learn and practice a calm and encouraging approach to a crisis. And so I'm going to talk in here about theory and some techniques of assessment and treatment that I believe can be incorporated into anyone's work. And then some suggestions on beneficial ones that I've found especially helpful. So what I am hoping you will do is take what you like and leave the rest. And if you have some questions, we can talk at the end. But it is the crisis intervention strategies need to be adapted to who we are and who we're working with, as well as the crisis. And that's why I say, feel free to adapt these. Also feel free to use these slides however you want. That's why I needed to do the little commercial piece with Wiley, because they said, that's the only thing, tell them about Wiley. And I said, okay. The other thing I forgot to say about myself is I am physically in my office at the university, and you can see behind me, I use a lot of experiential things in my teaching, but I thought it maybe would be helpful to explain things like the dragon in the corner and things like that before we move on. The stuffed dragon in the corner. Okay, next slide. So what we are doing, all of us as professionals, and I think of professionals as natural healers too, because as I've worked with clients, I have said to them, who are your natural healers? And it may be someone who cuts their hair. It might be somebody who lives in the same neighborhood as them. It might be someone who gives them coffee when they stop at a coffee shop. But it's those people that encourage us to keep going on, and that we may really hang on to as human beings in a crisis. Now, what I have found, and early on in my career, I found as a counselor, I found that somebody was going to have to be calm in the room and it looked like it was going to have to be me, right? And so I had to learn how to calm myself down. I'm going to talk with you about some strategies around that. This slide has to do with what the clients or whoever we're crossing paths with may do that accelerates crisis thinking. And so it's looking at how do they experience the event? And that's inside themselves as well as outside themselves. How do they perceive the event? So how do they and people around them look at the situation as a crisis? And then the acceleration of in crisis thinking can be that their normal methods are failing, and that they may be, some people may be crisis prone, and I put that in quotes, because they may have like a history of poor impulse control, a history of struggling with, you know, what we might call good judgment. They may have mood extremes or co-occurring disorders. A couple of mental health diagnosis disorders happening at the same time. So those are the three parts: the person's experience of an event, how they look at that, and people around them look at it, and then what's happening with their normal coping methods. All right, next slide. So these are things that we can do that will help deactivate the crisis triggers. One of the first things that I believe is important, and I say this often to my students, I teach graduate students in counseling, and I say to them, when you're in doubt, breathe. Because what we tend to do, and that will tend to calm us as well as our clients, what we tend to do in a crisis or a stressful situation is we'll do shallow breathing. That'll be like a reaction to it. We'll also do that when we're really focused on something. And in a crisis, if we are trying to focus, we may forget to take a deep breath at times. I believe this is really important when we're not sure what to do, to just stop, take a breath, and begin at that point of talking with the individual. The second one is critical. All of us as human beings know this, to avoid judgment. If you are like me, if I am feeling like I have a crisis, it does not help if someone says to me, well, that's not a crisis. Because for me, it is at that moment. And so it is more helpful if the person just listens to what I'm saying. The third part of it, to deactivate the crisis triggers, is to help the person sort out if it's a crisis and what needs to be done. And that general approach, there's some specific ones, but encouraging the person to be calm and to reach out for support and to practice self-compassion and self-forgiveness after the crisis has passed. And so the calmness is finding out for the person what calms them down. So one of the common things I'll do with people is work with their senses and see what is calming to them visually or auditory or smell. Any of the five senses, encourage them to do that type of thing. And then encourage them to reach out for support. So what I used to do at the health department is I would often be in a desk, in a room that had a desk that, you know, a relatively stark room that I wasn't taking from a practitioner. And I would say to people, see this table, it looks really strong, this desk, and it is. But if we keep piling and piling and piling things on this table, no matter what, it's gonna collapse or break or crack. And so then I would say, however, if we keep building supports under that, that table can be very strong. And that's what I try to emphasize on reaching out for support, is that during a crisis, we may need to, as human beings, reach out to others we might not normally reach out to. And then lastly, the part on self-compassion and self-forgiveness, that has to do with sometimes in the crisis, maybe often we don't do it as well as we wanted to. And so to say truly, we did the best we could in the situation. So next slide then. And this overall strategy for us is one that came up in a professional presentation I did with a group of folks a number of years ago. And it came out of a conversation with my husband when I was talking about something in the work world that was like, oh my gosh, you know, how do I deal with this? And I remember standing with him in our little farmhouse kitchen in Ashe County and saying, how am I going to deal with this? And he said, do the best you can with the mess you have. And that captured it. It was like, well, what else can I do? And then I was shortly thereafter doing a training for some health practitioners. And that became my approach around crisis intervention strategies, was to say to people, we can only as professionals do the best we can with the mess we have, because we may not feel like we're the best person to do it. We may not feel like we have the resources to do it. However, there we are. And so we do the best we can with the mess we have. Now, the other slides, if you want to start with the next one, I'm going to spend a little more time on each of them. Maybe it'll be about 5 minutes a piece. This is the one that Wiley said, yes, you can use this diagram. I really believe in this three-pronged stool, and I use it all over the place. I tell people about it all over the place. Three-legged stool, three-pronged stool, and it's around body self-care. It's that is the way to ground ourselves in stress. So both professionals and clients, and I'll stop putting them in quotes, but I really, professionals, anyone who's a helper, and a client, anyone who's receiving assistance. I talk about this three-pronged stool, that what we need to do is we need to take a look at diet, exercise, and sleep. And that a three-pronged stool, the reason I chose that has to do with those stools. You can't really stand on them. They move about. So we may have to, in a high stress situation as human beings, acclimate this. So as I'm talking with people, either pre-pandemic or during the pandemic, I have said there are times in our life that we have to, readjust that, so that what we're doing with our diet isn't as exceptional as we want to be doing with it, or exercise or sleep. But we need to do the best we can and hold on to that however we can as we're adapting it. And so my encouragement, that I will say everywhere is, do as much of this as you can every day in a way that is healthy. And I will get to one of my adages of pretty good is good enough, right? And so, making attempts for a pretty good diet, and making attempts to have some kind of movement in our life. And the last one of sleep is really critical. For whatever reason, we have a tendency under stress, it looks like, to cut sleep. And sleep is incredibly restorative. And so this is, in fact, as I was working on the 5th edition of my book, and reading in this area around pain management, and I won't go off into that, it is really, really critical, because a lack of sleep just facilitates all that pain. It impacts diet, impacts exercise. And so sleep is quite core, although all three prongs are important. So that's one of the things that I do in working with people in crisis, is look at that three-pronged stool for myself, and then I encourage that in clients too. All right, then the next slide. And this one I included particularly for these recent presentation I've been doing, because often we talk about stress management, but doing it in the middle of a work day. As I was talking with practitioners, that's where this came out of, therapists who were working. It was really, they're saying, don't tell people, don't wait till the end of a day. Don't wait till their vacation. Right in the middle of a work day, take a look at some things that can be done. And so I pulled out 3 from those conversations with professionals. And one was attitude awareness. So just being aware of, you know, how working with other clients, other professionals, you might, like if you were working with me, working, how that can be frustrating and stressful, simply being aware of it. And then also when it's an emotionally charged context, then it really it can be important to look at our attitude, because in emotionally charged context, we will tend to read things into people's behavior, assessing things quickly, making assumptions. So an awareness about our attitudes and the context, critical. Developing a larger perspective. So in a day, at a time, we're feeling stressed, saying, why am I doing this work? What is this about? And that may take us back to the core value that is guiding what we're doing, and help us keep our focus. And then lastly, the immediacy of stress management. So this one I always chuckle at, emotionally charged email. Years ago, when I was on a board, I asked somebody in the very early morning before this meeting we had in person, I said, how are you? And she said, I'm fine, but I haven't opened my emails yet. And I thought that was a great response. But that is one of the things, we can get emotionally charged emails or some kind of electronic communication. And the problem with electronic communication is that it takes out what I believe the last percent I read was 80% of our communication has nothing to do with the words. It has to do with our eyes, our voice tone, some humanness. That's communication. And that's most of our communication. So electronic communication takes out like about 80% of our message. And so when we get electronic communication, such as emails or text or whatever it might be, it's really important to realize that we aren't getting the full picture of that. We're just getting the words. And then some of them are truly emotionally charged, and we are aware of that. Then stress at the workplace, being aware of what's around us and how stressful it is, giving ourselves room on that. And then difficult clients. Some people are just more difficult to work with than others. And it might be for that moment in time in a crisis. So just to have those awarenesses of those three ways that maybe we can manage our stress right there in the middle of a workday. Okay. Then the next slide, top 10 assessment intervention strategies. This is going to go over 2 slides. And these are very basic. And I look at them as like, even though they're basic, they're very important. So I think of it as, you know, it's a good idea if I take a shower every day. It helps me feel better and it's better for the world. All right. And it's that same kind of practical approach around assessment intervention strategies, that some of these, they not only help us feel better, but they will then help others. So practice HALT, and that is don't get too hungry, angry, lonely, tired. So prior to my sitting with you, I'm making sure I'm not hungry. I'm not making sure I'm not angry, lonely, tired. So you get the best of me possible. And then the how is to be honest, open, and willing. And so when I go into a situation and I'm not sure how to handle it in a crisis, I will say, well, be honest and be open and be willing to look at all kinds of things in the situation. And the honesty, you know, is the kind of honesty where, you know, it's not that blunt, bowl them over honesty, but it is saying what we think in a compassionate, civilized way. And then being open to what happens and being willing to express our views, as well as hearing others. Number 3 is around assessment and intervention. As I was touching on earlier, we need to be aware of our own projections. And so what are our own personal and professional experiences with the crises that are going on? So, for example, and 9/11 is on my brain because it's, recently the 20th anniversary. But I had to be aware that every person in those 12-hour days that I came into contact with, what bias was I putting on them of what they might be going through? And to really have an openness to their story rather than me saying, well, if I were in New York and I lost my job and everything basically except my body, this is what I'd be going through. I'm maybe aware of that. And I can have that as a tentative thing I check out with people, but not assume that that's what they're going through. Number 4 is important, is being aware that we might be manipulated by the other person we're trying to help. And number 5, that again, as I said, I think is critical, is we need to know our own limitations personally and professionally, as well as our professional role. And though our role may have constraints to it in terms of what we do, but then it's also knowing what our limits are personally and professionally as we look at addressing the crisis. And though Denise, look at you, you are so on top of it. Denise went, number 6. This is a phrase that I coined a number of years ago when I was writing the first book on learning the language of addiction counseling. And it came out of with alcoholics and drug addicts needing to hold people accountable for their behavior, but also having compassion. And this is, and then as I was writing that book, I was realizing, well, I do that in all forms of counseling, is say to the person, you are accountable for your behavior. At the same time, I can have compassion for that because of understanding your story. So it's a balance between those two. And one of my markers clinically is anytime, a marker to beware is anytime I want to give special treatment, where I want to hold somebody really accountable for their behavior, or I want to really have so much compassion, I don't hold them accountable at all. And that's why the balance is very important, so that I'm doing both. Number 7, it's really good to focus on short-term goals in the context of the long-term. So what is it in this crisis that someone can focus on? It always helps us in a crisis as human beings if there's something right there we can do, but also to build on it, and that we may add things as we go along in coping with the crisis that will be helpful to us. Oh, number 8, slow it down and take time to assess problems. What typically will happen for people in a crisis situation and the professionals trying to help them is that we will want to go fast. And it's really, really important to slow it down. What it feels unnatural, like maybe going up a down escalator. But the reason is because there's a quote from someone that there's always more to the story. And we make sure that if we slow it down, we make sure that we're getting as much of the story as we can that's reducing our assumptions. Number 9 on assessment and intervention is working on a team of professionals that will show respect and engage in dialogue. So that's why I think that what you're doing in your WCCI, I wanted to get the acronym right, is great, because you're working in it's a large team in different ways, but you have a lot of connections. And in that group, then I'm assuming, because Denise was telling me like how many of people, you know, go to the website and watch these types of things, that you have mutual respect for one another in your areas, and that you can engage in dialogue about situations that come up. That is a great thing to have in a crisis situation, even if our team is just one other person. I mean, it's just helpful to have someone else to think with. So, for example, when I was up at 9/11 and I came back both times, and people were like, you know, thinking that I had a great amount of internal strength for doing that work, I said, you know, you need to remember something. I worked on a team, and we approached the disaster site that we worked on. I was with the American Red Cross. We approached it as a team, so that when one of us was strong, that one would be, you know, taking a lead. And when one of us was feeling weak, that one would like pull back. And that team approach also gave us encouragement and strength to go on in different situations, because we knew we weren't alone. You have that through WCCI. And then number 10, check trustworthy sources for crisis information. So I think here, and, you know, because I'm like with you for an hour, and to varying degrees, you may have more, less training than me in crisis intervention experience. But what I do, I encourage you to do is in a crisis, see what professional organizations are saying, whoever you identify with, around how to handle crises and how to get additional training besides things like this. And so I'm saying, please go back to your people, as I do around crisis work, to find out what is the most current. All right, now we're on to the next 10. And I'm going to spend about 5 or 10 minutes on that before we go to questions. The top 10 assessment and intervention strategies with other people. Of all of these slides, I wanted to spend the most time on this. And I'll try to elaborate on each one of these in a way that makes sense. Number 1 is finding out, what does the person know about their crisis? And then what are other people telling them about their crisis, which is what I was commenting on earlier. A third question is, what's the understanding that they have of the information they're getting? So if I break that down, it's like, if I'm having a crisis and I come to you, how you could help me is really say, Geri, you know, this crisis you're having, but how do you look at it? What's your perception of it? What's your story of the crisis? And then you could say, Geri, what are other people telling you about this crisis? And that part is important, because if you find out other people are telling me, oh my gosh, this is a really, really terrible crisis, right? And I don't know if you can handle it. Well, then you go, you know, we may need to look at some people being in her life, and you may say, I'm going to be one of them for Geri, that's going to be saying to her some message of, it may look like a lot, it may look overwhelming, and I'm going to stay with you. And those of us in here who have, and I'm guessing that's all of us, survived some kind of personal or professional crisis, we can remember, maybe with tears in our eyes, of somebody who said to us, I'll stay right with you. And the power of that in a crisis is amazing. Or metaphorically, I will say, it's like the old-fashioned lighthouse that would guide ships through storms. And that's what you as a helper can do for me, somebody in a crisis. And then, you know, asking me, what am I doing? How am I understanding this information that's coming my way? Information of how I'm looking at other people, what you're telling me as a counselor. What am I doing with all that comes? And then if you stay with that, and we stay with my pretending that you are helping me, remembering that I'm going to be similar and unique in the crisis. So even if I'm in a whole community of people, while I'll have similarities with them, there will also be unique factors because it's me, Geri, a person experiencing that crisis. And it may be different than other people in my community. It also may be, I may be different in terms of how much I'm wanting to change or motivated to change. And I may have different options and resources from other people. So if you can do an assessment of that, of just taking a look at how I might be similar to other people around me, whether it's my community, my family, my church affiliation, whatever it might be, what's similar, but also what's different. And then looking at that may play out in terms of how motivated we are to change. I am to change in comparison to others. And I may have different options or resources than other people. Okay. Number 3, because if we are in a helping role, we may be seen, whatever that is, as an authority figure. And some people simply don't have, and maybe it's for good reason, much faith in authority people. And so that place of just having an awareness that whoever's with us may not trust us as an authority figure. And working with that. Sometimes I have said for some people, as I, in my head, more than to them, kindness is a stranger to them. That they, given what life has given them, they're very suspicious about someone simply being kind. And everybody has an ulterior motive, especially authority people. And so I will think of it that way, that kindness may be a stranger to them. Number 4, it's critical to say what is right about the person. What are the strengths? My metaphor I often use for that is when I go take my car to the mechanic. I really want to have the problem addressed, but I also want to hear if it's still okay to hang on to this car or if that's a bad idea, right? So I mean, I'm not looking for a lot of things about my car, details about what's right, but I do want to get an assessment of that. Now, when that translates to other human beings, I think it is very important to tell somebody what's right, because in a crisis situation, what we can do is just fall to the place where we see what's wrong about us. And more importantly, or just as importantly, is to find out what we do well so that we play to our strengths. And it just does help to hear something like, you are doing the best you can with the mess you have. Number 5 is the one I talked about, for ourselves as healers, professionals, encouraging folks that come our way for assistance to practice hope, especially as they're going into a high stress situation or addressing it, just living with the crisis, making sure they're not too hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Number 6, on the next slide, this is a phrase that comes from the addictions field, but again, it is something so common for human beings that we need to learn how to live life on life's terms, that we don't necessarily like the poker hand we've been dealt, but that's the poker hand. And I put into that, and this is like jumping ahead to number 10, but the phrase I add to that, live life on life's terms, is in the context of that. Also, when we can, absolutely insist on enjoying life. And there may be in a crisis, it may just be too hard to enjoy life at that moment, that we're at maybe the apex of the crisis. We're living life on life's terms. But the encouragement to ourselves and others is, if we can, as soon as we can, find a way to insist on enjoying life in it. I will go on with that with number 10. But number 7, then, in finishing this up, some of you are probably pretty familiar with motivational interviewing approaches. If you're not, motivational interviewing is really a style of counseling. This is one of the acronyms used in it, and it may be helpful as a healer to think about it that way, to try to ask open questions, and that's anything that pulls at the story. And so the difference between, like you say to me, Geri, are you married or are you single, right? Okay, that's a closed question, but an open one is, Geri, tell me about your relationships in your life. And then that's an open one because it's going to pull me into talking. Affirmations, that is affirming something in the individual. My bias here is to make that genuine, honest, and also something that is about the person. So not, what I mean by that is not saying, oh, you're a good worker, but instead maybe saying, here you are in a crisis situation, and yet you still have the value of showing up for work. How impressive. A mother who can only do so much for her children, something I often ran into with my clients at the health department who were struggling with great poverty and barriers. And I would talk with them about how they were able to love their children, as well as express love to their children, as well as talking about the barriers and attempting to help them with that. But to say, here you are, still loving your children with the struggles that you have going on. Reflection, that is just saying back to somebody what they said. And, you know, it doesn't have to be the exact same words, but it's saying back what we hear them saying, that we're listening to them. And then a summary is what it sounds like, a summary. So I've heard those metaphorically described as, think of a reflection as like a flower and a summary as a bouquet. Comments. Oh, number 8, and I think about 1 minute left, so I'll touch on these. Number 8 is challenge the person's tendency to have a self-centered perspective. We need to be gentle with that, but what tends to happen in crisis is it gets real narrow. And it's very normal that that quote is what we want. We say, I want what I want when I want it. And that, because we just want out of the crisis, right? And so working with them about what follows there, helping them to learn to delay gratification, and work with them on how they're communicating and interacting with others. 9, I think, is very important. Go back when someone experiences a crisis, go back to a routine that supports them as soon as possible. Any parts of it that says the world is normal, we find that very, very reassuring. And then last, as I was saying, encourage play, humor, fun as soon as possible. We just have to be aware that some people might use it to run away from problems. That's what it means by unhealthy defense mechanism. And that some people might adapt more quickly or comfortably to it than others. So Denise, how did I do? Am I right on time or close?
You are right on time. I'm impressed. Good job.
Thank you. And I'm impressed with your subtle cue of 2 minutes. Thank you.
All right. We're a good team. So all such interesting and helpful information, even if we already knew it, it's a good reminder. I like the acronyms that help us remember. Those are definitely my 4 weaknesses: is hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. And I wrote down that sleep is critical for pain management, which I think I probably should have known that, but I don't think I've ever heard it that concretely. But I just think about all the people that I talk to who talk about pain in their bodies, and how interesting it would be to talk to them about their sleep habits. So that's something I'm going to continue thinking about. If you
can I tag along with that?
Yes.
Anyways, I won't go into like there's a woman named Darnell who did a great piece on pain management, put out a book. And so while I'm looking like I'm plugging my book, I'm not, but there is a chapter in here specifically on pain. And I did that, and it's beyond, use of substances, but I did it because I was trying to have something in one section that pulled at different information about pain. So it's very practical about some things people maybe can do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yes.
So if anybody has any questions, Geri wanted to leave some time, some structured, specific time for questions. If you have something that you would like to ask her, you're welcome to do that. Or if you just want to type a chat in to her about her visit with us today, I'll copy and paste those into an email to her so she can read them later. Let's see, Geri, unless a question comes in, one thing I'm wondering, you talked about some of the things you can do to take care of yourself. The second part of that question for me lately has been, how do you know when you need attention? How do you know when your needs aren't being met or you need to work on your needs? Like what are your cues that you need to do something to address your own wellness? How do you know?
Well, there's two simple things I do. And one of them is that I watch for an urge to be efficient. And better say the second one before I forget, although I might have already forgotten it. Okay, I watch that urge to be efficient. Oh, I know. And the second one is I watch how I'm treating other people. And that'll be my marker. And so the urge to be efficient is like in a crisis, is that I say if I'm going to make a mistake in a crisis, I would like it to be a mistake of the head and not one of the heart. And I don't think it's a good idea to make mistakes of the head either. But as one who's had, both experiencing it myself and other people, when people get in a place of efficiency, what we tend to do is forget about our humanness. And then it becomes just, do it. And we get processed. And that's what I mean by mistakes of the head. We can do it all right, but it's like fake fruit, it just doesn't sink in. And then we're making mistakes of the heart, which is where, like, you would say to me, Geri, I care about what happens to you. There are things we have to do here around this crisis situation, but I want to make sure you're all right. And then you're not making a mistake of the heart. You're keeping me in mind. And then the other thing is watch how I'm treating other people. That's an indication of how I'm treating myself. Like if I think I'm like pretty okay, like today, I think I'm a pretty okay person. Well, then I'm walking around the world, but I can look and see, am I treating people like they're pretty okay? And if I am, then I go, well, I must be thinking I'm pretty okay. Because usually, if I'm being mean to somebody else, I'm not taking care of myself. And this especially, I think now, but this is really critical in crisis. Another way I look at it simplistically is fear and love. To operate from a base of love and caring rather than fear. And so my metaphor has been, and I've got one on my desk, my metaphor has been like, what we can do as helpers is for people be like a candle holder, because a candle holder keeps a candle upright. so that the flame, which I say metaphorically is fear, the flame is not out of control, but some fear is healthy, you know, and so the flame needs to be there. But if it doesn't have a holder in terms of a helper or a community of support, then that flame of fear can be very, very dangerous.
Mm, I like that. You got a couple comments in the chat. Just thank you. Your biggest fans seem to be on this Zoom session today, and that the insidiousness of the fake fruit of processing people instead of loving them. So resonating, things you're saying are resonating with the people that are listening. So any other chats before?
Isn't it kind of I mean, at the risk of not using a PC correct metaphor, but I mean, don't you think, Denise, I'm sort of like preaching to the choir? You guys are doing this, you know, and so if anything, I was like, you know, feeling inadequate about offering anything to you. I really, the main thing I thought of is I'm just reminding you to do what you believe in.
Yeah, and I think that's very valuable. When we go into schools and teach about compassionate schools, we frequently say, you're already doing this. This either validates what you're doing, gives you another way to think about it, or helps you process it in a way that makes sense to you. So like, I'm one of the people that is in the choir that you're preaching to, but I've written down like 8 things that just really spoke to me. And so somebody just said the reminders are very helpful. So most of us are also lifelong learners, I think. And so hearing from different people is really exciting and interesting. So we so appreciate you sharing some of your wisdom with us today. And if nobody has any questions, and then we need to let Geri go pretty soon. If you'll just put any other chats, that anything you'd like to say to her as far as thank yous or good to see you again in the chat, and I'll send those on to her. Okay. But Geri, we so appreciate you.
Thank you. So, can I say one thing? Okay. Yeah. So really, I just want to underscore this. Every single one of us makes a difference in the world. And so what I do, and I have been someone who's been told both personally and professionally that I don't make a difference in the world. And so what I do, if you are ever told that in the important work you're doing, and it is, if we're being caring to another human being, I don't know that there's any more important work than that, whatever form that takes. And so if anybody says to me, which they have, and I can't do this, right, necessarily, but I can think about doing it, is that if they say you don't make a difference in the world, I can do this, you know, which what kids do, right? I'm not listening. I'm not listening. And that's basically what I do, because simply they're just wrong. Every single one of us in this 1 hour, whatever we are doing in the world to care about other human beings, that makes a difference, whether we see it or not. And when I was up at 9/11, one of the times, there was a Red Cross worker. Now this was appropriate. You got to understand the chaos in which we were working. And she just said really loudly, Geri, how do we know if we make a difference? She was new to the site. And I said, we don't. But that's not our job. And I really say, you are making a difference in the world. And whether we know we make a difference or not, where, you know, it shows up in some kind of way, that's not our job. Our job is to go about, stay doing the incredibly important caring work we are in supporting others. So I just wish you guys the very best.
Thank you, Geri. It was a pleasure to spend time with you. I hope I get to do it again someday.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
All right. Bye. I'm turning off the recording. Hope you have a good day.